Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar presentation today. My name is Ron Hoppy. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Worldwide Health Staff Solutions, and I'm happy to be joined by Courtney Donald. Courtney is our Director of Account Management, and we look forward to spending this time together today to review sort of the latest developments and the latest information related to visa processing times. If you are an applicant, today's presentation is oriented primarily towards U.S. healthcare employers. But if you're joining us and you are an applicant, I would invite you to visit our YouTube channel. There you will find the recording of a webinar we did last week on the October 2024 Visa Bulletin, where we covered much of the information that we will cover today from the applicant's perspective. So if you are an applicant, you'll probably find that presentation, that recording of our webinar from last week on the October Visa Bulletin on our YouTube channel to be of greatest assistance to you. Of course, as always, don't hesitate to reach out with any questions that you may have. The focus of our conversation today and our question and answer period to follow is just to provide an update to you on visa processing times and strategies that you may wish to consider relative to your international recruitment plans and strategies in order to achieve an optimal result, not only in the short term, but in the medium and longer term as well. Just want to provide a very quick overview of the visa application process. CJ, if we could get the next slide, please. So as you're probably aware, internationally educated registered nurses enter the United States almost exclusively as permanent residents. They are arriving as a permanent resident. They're able to bring their immediate family members, and they're arriving with a visa that never expires and never needs to be renewed. Obviously, a key question to the whole international recruitment process is how long is it going to take? And if you've been involved in international recruitment for any period of time, you will know that processing times fluctuate. And as we think about visa processing times and the green cards visa process overall, I think it's important to kind of understand a little bit about the background of the program and really how it functions. And we'll get into that in some detail on later slides. But I think as we think about the current process, the good news is that the current green card process is very well established, and the outcomes are very, very predictable. What I mean by this is the current program, its rules and regulations have been in place and really haven't changed since the late 1990s. A properly prepared application it's almost a virtual certainty that it's going to be approved. So there should never be a question as an employer around will my applications be approved? They will be approved. It is an extremely rare occurrence where a petition is not approved. And more often than not, that is simply an administrative error that is rectified very, very quickly. But the good news is the system is well established, and the outcomes are highly predictable. The not so good news, in full transparency, is that the system is based on annual arbitrary quotas regardless of what the labor force demand might be. And these quotas also haven't changed since the 1990s. Now, the US as a country has changed, the economy has changed, the workforce has changed, but we're still dealing with these arbitrary numerical caps that were established, 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago. And that is the reason why we see the fluctuations that we see from time to time in visa processing times. Next slide, please, CJ. So a term that is frequently used, or a term that's frequently heard in relation to visa processing times, is the term retrogression. Probably not a word we're going to ever use in any other part of our life, other than when we're talking about visa processing times. But retrogression really refers to or describes a condition that arises when the number of visa applications received or in process at any one point in time exceeds the number of available visas in the current fiscal period. So currently, there is an annual quota of 145,000 employment-based green card visas. This is not just for registered nurses or healthcare professionals. This includes all occupational groups that would qualify for an employment-based visa. That's everything from nurse aides to IT professionals to architects to accountants, and even through to some manufacturing type of positions. So retrogression simply describes the condition that exists when there's more applications have been received or are in process than there are visas in the current fiscal period. Now, when this condition occurs, retrogression, it does not, and I'll just emphasize, does not impact the ability to file new petitions. There is no limit or restriction on the ability to file petitions at any point in time. So when we're talking about retrogression, we're talking about a condition that impacts the back end of the visa issuance process without really any impact whatsoever on the front end of the process. So that when we're talking about retrogression, that is what we are referring to. And just logically, looking at this logically, if you say, well, there's more visa applications in the system than there are visas available, by deduction, then we can conclude that an applicant may not receive their visa in the current government fiscal period. And just FYI, the U.S. federal government fiscal year runs from October 1st through to September 30th. So that's why the October Visa Bulletin is of such great interest and importance, because October is when a new annual allotment of visas are made available. Next slide, please. I think it's also helpful when we're trying to understand fairly complicated issues and trying to understand what's happening today in the context of what happened yesterday, trying to get some visibility into what might happen tomorrow. So this chart that's up on the screen now represents a look back over the last 10 years at visa processing times for registered nurses. And you can see on this chart, there's also two horizontal red lines. One denotes 12 months, and the second line denotes 24 months. For a long time, probably since 2021, we were seeing visa processing times that we had marked right around the 12-month time period for processing. Actually, coming out of COVID, because there were so many unused visas from the COVID years that were rolled over to more current years as the pandemic ended, we were actually in a situation that was referred to as current. So the Visa Bulletin would have said visa processing times are current. That's not to suggest that an application filed on Monday would be processed by the following Monday, but it meant that there were more visas available than there were applications in the system. And while the Visa Bulletin dates were current, we were seeing processing times around 12 months. Some variation, some cases 10, 11 months, some cases 15 months, but we were seeing pretty consistent processing times in that range. Then as we got to the latter end of 2023 and into 2024, we saw the processing times initially jump up a bit, and then in 2024, we saw them actually jump up a fair bit, particularly in the second quarter or third quarter of 2024. The green bar on the right represents the actual current visa processing time. So we're back within that 12 to 24 month time frame where we are very, very comfortable in continuing to move forward with new applications. So you can see that while processing times have been somewhat shorter in recent times, if we look back a little bit, there's also extended times where they have been much, much longer. And again, back to my earlier comment that whether it's 12 months or whether it's 24 months, the process is, and the outcome of that process is very, very much predictable. So we'll talk about this, how to think about this 12 months versus 24 months versus 18 months versus something else in just a moment here. I've also been remiss in saying, and I should have shared this at the outset, I'm just going to be sharing a few slides here as part of this presentation, but then I find it's often most effective to exchange information in the form of questions and answers. So if you do have questions on any of the information that's being shared here today, or just questions generally, please feel free to use the chat section of your screen. And in just a few moments here, we'll certainly be happy to respond to any questions that you may have. So CJ, if we could move on to the next slide. So as we think about international nurse recruiting, and as we think about visa processing times, and what role might international recruiting play in an overall staffing strategy to try and address this current shortage in the workforce, I thought it might be helpful just to share this very simple chart that was put out by the LEK Consulting Group within the last year or so. And what you have here is a chart that simply shows one line is the upper line is the demand for registered nurses, and the projected demand for registered nurses up against the supply. And what we can see here, if we even look a little forward from the dotted line in the middle of the screen, as we're in 24, 23, 24, not only is this shortage condition persisting, it's in fact predicted and anticipated that it's going to continue to increase. I often share my thought this way in saying that U.S. healthcare employers really do not have a recruiting challenge. U.S. healthcare employers are faced with a supply and demand challenge. And I would respectfully submit that those really are two different things. Recruiting suggests that there's a supply of candidates or a pool of candidates, and it's a matter of having the right tactics and strategy to engage with those candidates and to recruit them. The reality is, if an employer had access to every qualified candidate, or let me rephrase that, if employers in the aggregate had access to every qualified candidate to fill a particular position, if employers had that access and put that up against all the open positions to be filled, there would still be this gap, this supply demand gap. And there's a limited number of meaningful options. I believe that U.S. health systems have to close this gap. And international recruiting certainly is a part of that. So we have visa processing times that are fluctuating, currently within sort of the historical norm for processing times. At the same time, where employers are looking at the prospects of their supply-demand challenges not being reduced or mitigated, but in fact, increasing for the foreseeable future. Next slide, please. I think most everyone is familiar with the acronym FIFO, first in, first out. And I share this in the context of visa processing and visa processing times to simply make this point, that visa applications are generally processed in the order in which they are received. So a visa application that is submitted to the United States government today, all things being equal, that application is going to be processed to completion and a visa issued ahead of an application that's filed next week or next month or next quarter. So visa applications are processed on a first come, first served basis. So given that information, then it's not a big leap to get to the conclusion that the most critical step in having your international registered nurses arrive in the shortest possible time is to recruit and file petitions as soon as possible. Even if the visa processing dates were to be current today, and you were to file petitions today or tomorrow, there's no assurance that those visa processing times might not change while your applications are in process. And as we saw from the earlier chart, they have fluctuated to be shorter at times, longer at times. But the reality is that applications are processed on a first in, first out basis. And therefore, the most effective way of having your applicants arrive in the shortest period of time, obviously, notwithstanding, working with qualified and experienced partners that can provide the necessary expertise to facilitate the process, the most critical steps to having your nurses arrive in the shortest time is to recruit and file petitions now. Next slide, please. Now, if the question is, what are the processing times today? And we've talked about that a little bit, and we've provided a bit of a look back as to kind of how processing times have worked over time. The next question that is very frequently asked, and rightfully so, is, so what do you think the processing times are going to be in the future? Well, the honest truth is that beyond looking just a few months out, it is really an exercise in educated guessing as to what the processing times might be going forward beyond the next, I would say, 3 or 4 months. At this period in time, the U.S. State Department publishes an update on a monthly basis as they tabulate the number of applications in process, the number of new applications received against the number of visas that have actually been issued. And that's the basis on which the processing dates are updated. But what I am pretty comfortable in sharing is that it is reasonable to expect that from where we're at today, that processing times are going to improve slightly. And I would anticipate to see this improvement carry through to March of 2025. So that would be if we're in still in September now, that would see processing times be reduced by about 5 or 6 months if this were to happen. And then we would be getting much closer to that historical low of 12 months of processing time. So that's sort of my best assessment. Again, if anybody says they can with certainty tell you what the processing times will be in the future, I would politely take that information with a grain of salt and a hefty dose of skepticism. But that's kind of the short-term expectations that we have here at Worldwide Health Staff Solutions. In addition to any changes that may take place in the processing times themselves, there's a lot of work that's being done in terms of bringing forth regulatory or legislative actions that are intended to increase the number of visas specifically for nurses and also decrease visa processing times. Some of you may be familiar, or your government relations teams may be familiar with a pending piece of legislation referred to or titled the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act. That act intends to do specifically what's noted here. Without getting into commentary on sort of the political environment in Washington, D.C. these days, there are many, many loud voices speaking into this issue. The American Hospital Association, the American Association representing long-term care providers, many others, state hospital associations, who have come out strongly in support of regulatory and legislative reforms intended to help address this persistent and growing supply and demand imbalance through having more nurses and more physicians being able to arrive more quickly. All of that being said, I think for planning purposes, it is appropriate and prudent that as you're evaluating how international recruitment fits into your strategy, that you essentially look at this as being a 2-year process from the time that your visa applications are filed until the time that you would have those nurses joining your workforce. And in the case of our organization, our clients have those nurses joining them as their direct permanent employees. And I would certainly be happy to share additional information on that approach to international recruitment. And if you just drop us a line in the chat or send us an email, we'd be happy to follow up with that information. So that's kind of our assessment of the timelines that we're looking at. We're optimistic that there is some opportunity for legislative or regulatory reform. From my discussions with different stakeholders in Washington, I think if this was to happen, it would likely happen in what is referred to as the lame duck session of Congress, that period of time after the election in November and before the new Congress is seated in January of 2025. Next slide, please. So, just a last thought to share with you if you're kind of wondering how you might think about, um, again, how international recruitment might fit into your strategy, given the timelines involved. Again, our experience and the data backs it up is, the challenge that employers face isn't going away. And as I was kind of thinking about how, in different ways of illustrating the point that the sooner you start, the sooner you're going to get a result. But I also thought that that was only part of the answer. I think as you think about international recruitment, I think a suitable analogy is kind of to think about it as you would think about your own 401k, right? And generally, for most of us, we're making contributions to our 401k each pay period or monthly on some regular basis. We're making those contributions at a particular point in time, and maybe at one point in time the market is up, and maybe at other points in time the market is down. But the key to success in our 401 strategy is that we're making consistent contributions, and over time, sometimes the market's up, sometimes it's down, but the research is clear that it's almost impossible to pick the right moment to make those investments. And I think sort of a very similar mindset or logic applies to international recruiting. The fastest way of getting people here is to apply for their applications as soon as possible. But beyond that, given that we're dealing with an ongoing long-term problem, I think it's also advisable to think about, your international recruitment activities either as a pipeline or as your 401k, where you're um, on a regular basis. And in the terms of recruitment, maybe it's quarterly or twice a year, or maybe even annually, right? You're recruiting some international candidates and adding them to your portfolio or adding them to your pipeline. When you add them at some point in time, maybe the processing time is very short, and maybe at other times it's a little bit longer. But the question ultimately is, how do I get the valuable experienced candidates here as quickly as possible, given whatever the processing times are? And that answer, as I've said multiple times now, is simply to initiate some applications as soon as possible, and then to think about it as feeding a pipeline or regular contributions to a retirement savings plan, where you're building a medium to longer term strategy that's ultimately going to get you the very best possible outcome. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, just very, very quickly, plan for processing times. If you're looking at international recruiting, plan for processing times of about 2 years. FIFO, remember, first in, first out. The sooner you get started, the sooner you will have candidates arrive. And as I made one reference to in a previous slide, the direct hire model of international recruitment is one that is going to deliver to you the best quantitative or financial outcomes, as well as the best qualitative or patient care outcomes. So with that being said, I see we have a number of questions that have come in. Our colleague CJ has been monitoring the questions. And CJ, if you could just jump in here and just help us navigate through some of these questions, we'll be happy to answer them. And particularly if anyone, or for those that are on the call that are U.S. employers, again, please feel free to share any questions that you may have, or feel free to reach out to the Worldwide Health Staff team directly, and we'd be happy to discuss your question in detail. So CJ, thanks for being on and helping this morning. Why don't you kick us off with the questions?
Okay, sure. So I've seen a few questions like from our nurses. Let's start with this one. Um, Hi, Ron. For an H-1B cap exempt employer filing for an international medtech, how long does it usually take at the Department of Labor and the US CIS? Or
Hmm,
if I should
yeah.
submit all documents to my case manager, how long until I hear from them to book a consular interview?
Yeah. Okay. So interesting question. That's a little different than the topic today, which is EB3 visas, which med lab techs very seldom use. But I'll just very quickly answer the question. For an H-1B application for med lab techs, the first thing is U.S. certification. The second thing is a job offer letter from a U.S. employer. And once you do have a job offer letter from a U.S. employer, then absolutely submitting your documents today would be the right thing to do because they're required to file an H-1B application. H-1B visa applications, particularly for cap exempt employers, can be processed quite quickly, uh, pretty readily within a 3 to 6 month time frame. But the first essential elements of being able to do that is to have the U.S. Lab certification, ASCPI, and to have a job offer from a U.S. cap exempt employer.
Okay, thanks, Ron. So our questions are like from our nurses, and this one again is from Maydot. Greetings all. I'm waiting for my I-140 approval, and I am a nurse, but currently not working in a bedside setting. I supervise nurse students. Would my current status be an issue for my visa issuance?
Um, Again, it's difficult with limited facts, but generally speaking, it would not be an issue. If you are a registered nurse, you have a registered nursing job offer from a U.S. employer, you've graduated as a registered nurse, you hold a registered nurse license in your home country, and you are doing nursing related work. So based on that limited fact set, I would say that that shouldn't be an issue from an immigration perspective going forward.
Okay. So there are a lot of questions about their priority dates and asking when do they expect to be current, something like that for the Visa Bulletin.
Yeah.
Um,
So as I said before, nobody knows exactly what the priority dates are going to be going forward. We've just had the October Visa Bulletin, and as I shared, I think we're going to get forward movement to I'm thinking at least March of 2020, March of 2023. I think we're going to see that happen here in the next couple of months. Whether we get stalled there, whether the forward movement gets stalled there, or whether it moves forward further, I don't know. But if I was a registered nurse that had a priority date of March 2023 or earlier, I would be working very, very diligently to making sure that I have everything that I need to be ready for my embassy interview. So that means update your resume. That means having visa screen, absolutely having visa screen, because I think it would be entirely reasonable to expect, in my opinion, that we can see a March 2023 priority date, I would think by the end of this year.
all right, awesome. Okay, so this will be our last question, Ron. So do you have any comments about like case of abandonment, like employer abandonment? Like,
Just one.
will you?
Sorry for the disruption. So abandonment. So if a candidate is worried about an employer abandoning their application because of the timeline involved, I can't speak other than just anecdotally for others. I can speak, however, from the Worldwide Health Staff perspective. Now, our clients are very committed to the international recruitment process and to the investment that they've made in the applications of our applicants. It is extremely rare. It is extremely rare in our experience that employers are going to back away from their registered nursing applicants. I think it is a concern if you're working perhaps with a staffing agency and not a direct hire employer, particularly if you're working with a smaller or less established staffing agency, that they may not have the same level of commitment to the process as does the vast majority of direct hire employers. So I think the way to address that issue, if you've not yet started an application, is to ensure that you are working with a large, well-established, I would suggest direct hire recruitment firm that is working with larger healthcare organizations and healthcare providers. But let me kind of comment on this from the other side of this coin, because abandonment, if you're working with the right recruitment agency, isn't always a disaster or some sort of catastrophic event. Abandonment to me suggests that you currently have a petition and that petition has been approved. That approved petition provides you with a priority date that might be 1 or 2 years old. When we are approached by candidates that have been abandoned by other employers, we welcome them with open arms, because we're able to have their previous priority date recaptured. That means they're going to be able to arrive far more quickly than a new candidate that's just recruited today. And we have such a broad client base that we're able to find a suitable opportunity for that abandoned applicant, recover their previous priority date. It's going to result in some slight delay in the time that you will arrive in the US, but it's far from catastrophic. It's far from disastrous. And sometimes we find applicants are actually happier and more satisfied with the second opportunity that they've been presented with than the first. So I appreciate that it's a concern. And just as I've said, make sure you know the organization you're working with, the scope and the scale of their operations. And I think the larger the employer, the larger the recruitment agency you're working with, the more secure you're going to be in the context of possible abandonment.
All right, I think that's it. And just to remind our nurses out there that if you have case-specific questions, please reach out to your case managers, and they will be more than happy to assist you and help you with your questions. So, any last thoughts, Ron?
So, just one, and then I'll ask Courtney if he has anything to add. It looks like we have a lot of applicants on here today. Someone's entered in the chat, that they were abandoned and we haven't found a new employer. Let me be very clear, right? When I talk about and when I respond to this question of abandonment, right, I was speaking very clearly and very specifically in the context of registered nurses. Abandonment has been an issue for candidates being processed in the nurse aid category. That's virtually a completely different topic, and we've done webinar presentations on this that are also available on YouTube, and I know we'll do further webinar presentations. But I want to be very clear that my comments that I've shared today around abandonment are focused very, very specifically on registered nurses. Courtney, thanks for hanging out with us here today. I'm glad you were able to join us. Any other thoughts, comments, or suggestions that you might offer to either a candidate or to an employer?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Ron. Hello, everyone. I think for me, the biggest point to remember is that anytime we have an advancement forward in the Visa Bulletin, that's positive news, right? And then I think the other piece there, just message out if there are any specific questions that our clients have about candidates that are in process and how the new Visa Bulletin will impact their arrival date. Please do reach out to your regional account manager or myself, and then look for upcoming updates in the client reports you'll be receiving in October.
Awesome. Courtney, thank you. CJ, thank you. Again, thank you to everyone who joined us today. I hope we've been able to share some information that's been helpful or will be useful to you. Again, the recordings of all previous webinars are accessible on our YouTube channel. We did a very detailed presentation last week on this topic, focused specifically on applicants. Also, please stay connected to our various social media channels for information on upcoming future webinars. We have presentations, educational presentations of this nature on a weekly basis, and we'd love to have you join us for an upcoming webinar. Again, a copy or a recording of this presentation will be up on our YouTube channel within the next 2 or 3 days. And please feel free to visit us there to review the information that's been provided here today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest. It's been a pleasure to spend this time with you. I wish you all a great rest of your Wednesday, wherever you might be in the world. I myself am excited to be headed over to Ghana this week on Sunday. So I'll be there early next week, followed by a few days in Kenya. So looking forward to connecting with candidates and applicants there. Thank you again for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.